Can a car designed to win titles to become the greatest enemy of your star pilot? What has Lewis Hamilton discovered in Ferrari that he has it so frustrated after the Mugello test? During winter, the signals were positive. In Maranello, optimism was breathed. Rumors talked about a more solid car base, with better simulator data and a more reliable aerodynamic correlation. Everything indicated that the SF25 was, at least on paper, the qualitative leap that the team needed. But as soon as it touched track in real conditions, the illusion began to dilute. The first big blow of reality came in the private tests held in Mugello, a circuit where Ferrari usually performs key evaluations. There, far from the cameras and media pressure, it was discovered that the SF25 did not behave as expected. Although the team tried to minimize alarm signals, internally the concerns grew. The car was fast in simulations, yes, but tremendously demanding. Its balance changes in high-speed curves, the lack of traction in the exit of slow curves, and a strong braking erratic behavior revealed a car so sensitive that any error in tuning ruined the day. And if for Leclerc this challenge was familiar, for Hamilton it was a bucket of cold water. Accustomed to working with balanced cars, even in its worst years with Mercedes, the SF25 felt like a wild machine. After years in an ultra-structured environment, the British met a car that did not respond even when telemetry adjustments between both pilots were replicated. It was here when their first criticisms began to be heard, evening at first, but increasingly direct. In his words after the GP of Spain, "There are turns in which I do not know if the car is going to respond to me in the same way 2 curves in a row." A statement that, for any pilot, implies a total loss of confidence. The technical disaster of the SF25 was not a fortuitous accident. It was the direct consequence of risky engineering decisions, driven by Ferrari's obsession to break the limitations that had stopped their cars during the last seasons. The technical team, led by key figures within the aerodynamic and design department, opted for a radically different philosophy. They wanted a car that not only competed with McLaren and Red Bull, but would overcome them with an aggressive interpretation of the regulation. But that search for innovation became a trap that they have not yet been able to deactivate. The first big change, and perhaps the most compromising, was the redesign of the front suspension system, moving from a conventional pushrod scheme to a more compact pull rod system. This technical choice, adopted by its potential to reduce aerodynamic resistance and allow greater freedom in the design of the lower flow of the car, triggered a series of collateral problems. Pull rod, although it offers advantages in concept, requires an extremely precise configuration of the chassis and a perfect balance of the mass center. The SF25 simply failed. This redesign drastically altered the behavior of the car in braking, rapid curves, and changes of direction. What Ferrari did not anticipate or underestimated was the impact of this suspension on interaction with the soil, crucial under the current regulation that prioritizes the soil effect as the main generator of aerodynamic load. The load that was previously distributed by the ailerons now depends in more than 70% of the floor of the car and the diffuser. This means that any minimum alteration in the height of the car or in the stiffness of the chassis critically affects its aerodynamic performance. And this is where the problem becomes insurmountable. To maximize the load, Ferrari configured the SF25 to roll as low as possible, bordering the limits of the FIA regulations. But in doing so, the car began to suffer excessive wear of the lower plate, the plank, that protects the flat background. This component, manufactured with reinforced resins and titanium reinforcements, has a regulated thickness. If you wear more than allowed, the car is disqualified. Exactly that was what happened in China's GP with Hamilton. The car was found with an erosion of more than 1 millimeter in critical areas, confirming that Ferrari was operating in the edge of technical illegality. This dilemma forced the team to make a desperate decision, or lifted the car to avoid sanctions, thus losing up to 20% of their aerodynamic load, or kept it low and risked disqualifications. And as if that were not enough, this technical conflict even generated more internal complications. The engineers began working with multiple parallel configurations, trying to find a compromise solution, but that only generated more chaos. Each modification affected other areas: the refrigeration of the brakes, the behavior of the diffuser, the stability in average curves. Nothing worked together. What should be a cohesive car became an unconnected puzzle. To this context is added a chronic problem in Ferrari: the difficulty in correlating the wind tunnel data with the real behavior on the track. In theory, SF25 was competitive. On the track, however, its operational windows were so narrow that a slight change of temperature or wind was enough for the car to become indomitable. In the words of an engineer cited internally, The SF25 is like a car that is in balance on a tightrope. If a millimeter is deviated, it falls. This not only frustrated the pilots, but made almost impossible to refine career strategies. Every set of setup was a bet. The most disconcerting is that this situation was self-induced. Ferrari had a solid base with the SF24 of the previous year. But instead of evolving that platform, they decided to start almost from scratch. They bet on a qualitative leap that, although it could have placed them ahead of McLaren and Red Bull, ended up leaving them with a temperamental car full of structural defects. A car that, instead of being an attack tool, has forced its pilots to run on defensive. In short, what Ferrari did was not just risky, it was precipitated. In their eagerness to win at any cost, they designed a car that betrays the confidence of those who drive it. And that, in a category where precision is the difference between glory and disaster, it can be the most unforgivable error. During the start of the 2025 season, there is no room for resignation in Ferrari. The pressure is monumental. Internally they know, there is no room for more mistakes. What happened in Mugello was an alert, but also a unique opportunity to make drastic adjustments before the season enters an irreversible spiral. And for the first time in a long time, Maranello's structure has opted for a proactive and aggressive response. The roadmap to recovery is already underway and is not superficial. Ferrari has made the decision to redesign a key part of the car: the flat background, the rear diffuser, and the lower structure of the body. It is not simply about adapting emergency solutions to gain a few tenths, but of a deep modification of the SF25 philosophy to expand its operational window. The aerodynamic team currently works in a new generation of internal pipes, which seek to improve the soil effect without depending so much on an ultra-low height. The objective is to recover aerodynamic load without subjecting the iron to an excessive wear. This update will also include new materials in the background support structure, with a combination of resistant to abrasion and reinforced contact points that will better distribute pressure under extreme loads. In parallel, Ferrari is evaluating a reconfiguration of the front suspension. Although they will not leave pull rod, they look for anchor alternatives that reduce unpredictability in high-speed curves. A minor change in appearance, but vital to improve the consistency of front axle behavior. Another key front is thermal management. The SF25 has shown deficiencies in brake cooling and heat dissipation of the ERS, which compromises performance in prolonged career conditions. To do this, Ferrari will implement new, more efficient air intakes and a revised heat exchanger system. The idea is not only to keep the engine within its limits, but to allow more aggressive configurations and classification without the risk of thermal degradation. But perhaps the most significant improvement is not in the car, but in the strategic approach. From the Chinese Grand Prix, Ferrari has reinforced its real-time analysis structure. They have hired 2 new data correlation specialists from the aerospace sector, whose task will be to refine the correspondence between simulator, wind tunnel, and track data. This has historically been one of the weak points of the team, and addressing it with external experts shows a change of mentality. Ferrari is not only redesigning his car, he is redesigning his work method. As for Lewis Hamilton, his influence already begins to be noticed in planning decisions. He has requested exclusive sessions in the simulator with variable weather conditions, to better understand the limits of the car and propose adjustments directly from his experience. The relationship between pilot and engineers, although initially tense, has become a more fluid technical dialogue. Hamilton does not expect miracles, but demands measurable answers. And in Ferrari they know that they cannot afford to lose their trust. The great unknown that overlays this story is not only if Ferrari can solve its technical problems. The real question, the most human, is whether Lewis Hamilton can sustain faith. Because this is not a pilot who needs to demonstrate anything. It has already broken all records. It has already risen to the top of the sport again and again. His arrival to Ferrari was not a logical decision, it was an emotional decision. A commitment to the legacy. For writing one last page but in red ink. And that kind of bets do not tolerate half inks, or crowns the story with glory, or you end up trapped in a cycle of frustration that does not forgive. And yet, despite everything, there is something deeply inspiring at this time. Hamilton has not resigned. Ferrari has not thrown the towel. Both understand that the seasons are built in the details, in constant evolution, in the invisible work that no one sees when the podium lights go out. What happened in Mugello was a blow, but also an opportunity to remake. What has been experienced in Australia, China, and now in the internal meetings of the team, is the prelude to a potential rebirth that will only be possible if 3 factors are aligned: technical humility, surgical execution, and firm leadership. both from the wall and from the cockpit. If this combination, which seemed to the legend, can be rebuilt in time before the season is escaped, if there is something they can still save. And now, I want to know your opinion. Do you think Ferrari is doing the right thing to redesign the SF25 from the base, or are trying to cover an error with a hurry? Do you think Hamilton made the right decision, or his legacy is at risk in Maranello? I read you in the comments.